Welcome to the Rouge, White, and Blue CFL podcast. I'm Joe Pritchard. Oz Davis is on assignment this week, and that assignment is having a wonderful family vacation. So I've decided to bring in Santino Filoso from Three Down Nation to talk about a team that's not going to be in the playoffs this year, and just go ahead and cover what happened out there. And we may or may not be back for the playoff coverage at the end of this week, but we'll get you what we can. And stay tuned for the rest of the show. All right, and let's welcome in Santino Filoso from Three Down Nation. So just to introduce our guest to Santino, so you know how we do this show from Wisconsin and Hungary at this point. Santino is coming to us from Brazil. We were hoping to do a worldwide show this week, but that kind of went off the rails. But we'll still bring you a lot of Canadian football action from outside of Canada. Santino, welcome to the show.
Hey, Joe, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Yes. So you cover the Ottawa Red Blacks for Three Down Nation, and it's probably been a little bit tough to do so lately, hasn't it?
Yeah, this year definitely. I mean, the last couple of years have been a little tough, but this one in particular, especially because I think coming into the season, there was really high expectations. I think a lot of people felt that, after the 2018 Grey Cup, there had been some turnovers, whether it was the head coach, the front office. There was issues trying to find a quarterback after Trevor Harris left, whether it was Matt Nichols, Jeremiah Masoli. I think it kind of felt like all the pieces were in place heading into 2025. It felt like Sean Burke had done a great job assembling talent. Obviously it's easy in hindsight to kind of call people out, but there was quite a few people that were high on the Red Blacks heading into the season. Obviously things didn't play out that way.
No, it didn't. It didn't. They did have a hot start to last season, and it took me about a month into this season to realize, yeah, that hot start happened, but then they kind of faded away. It's like, why was I so high on them? But you thought you had a franchise quarterback in Drew Brown. You feel like you had a good coaching staff in place. Tommy Condell's been around the league for a while and has had some success. Bob Dice was getting used to the role of head coach. He had been a part of the success in 2024, but it just didn't seem like the puzzle pieces fit very well this week or this year.
Yeah, I think it was kind of a combination of things. I mean, obviously the Red Blacks, just like your Bombers, have been very banged up. There's a bunch of players who missed significant amounts of time, especially at the quarterback position. Drew Brown, as you were talking about, did miss quite a number of games. Dustin Crum stepped in and, to his credit, actually played quite well. But he was banged up as well. And it was a tough year injury wise. But yeah, as you said, I mean, it definitely did feel like there was just something off in Ottawa, because it seemed like, on paper, Ottawa had a lot of weapons, but they just weren't really used well. If I'm being honest, I think that the offensive system they had just didn't work. You can even see in the fact that of the 18 games they played in 2025, they scored 3 points or less in 16 of those games. So they were, consistently starting off trailing by double digits, and they just weren't always able to claw their way back from those deficits.
No, and the game that obviously sticks out for me was the game in Ottawa this year between Winnipeg and the Red Blacks, where Chris Drevler threw 8 passes, and the Bombers felt very comfortable in winning that game throughout most of that game. I looked at the stat sheet after that, and Drew Brown had thrown 400 yards, and I have to say it was the quietest 400 yards I've ever seen a quarterback throw for. They seemed to put up some numbers, but there just didn't seem to be a lot of spark to it.
No, well, that's the other thing with Ottawa's offense. They didn't really generate explosive plays. I think they threw over 600 pass attempts this season, and only 13 of those went for more than 30 yards. And that's including yards after the catch. So it's just like Ottawa wasn't stretching the field, which is crazy when you think about a roster that has Eugene Lewis, Justin Hardy, Braylon Addison, Marco Dubois. There was quite a number of playmakers there. Khalil Pimpleton, And just, yeah, they weren't connecting on the deep shots when they took them, but I think the bigger problem was that they weren't even trying deep shots.
No, they weren't. They weren't.
Offensive system, everything was centered on like screens, hitch passes, quick passes. Very often it would be second and long, and it was a quick 3-yard pass, and it was like the receiver had to make a couple guys miss. And you can't live like that. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to put drives together.
Break 3 tackles and move the chains for us. That doesn't seem like a winning strategy.
Once in a while, sure, but trying to do that, drive in, drive out, it's not going to work.
No, and we've seen CFL offensive coordinators like get stuck on an idea and just not change when it's going. I remember when the Bombers had Lucky Whitehead back about 5 years ago, where it felt like they would start the game with a jet sweep to Lucky Whitehead in the first drive, and then you'd never see him again. And by the time like the 10th week came around, it's like, okay, so we're going to do this, that, and that for our first drive, punt, and then we can do our offense.
Yeah.
It's just didn't seem like there was a lot of ability to change up when things were going wrong.
No, there wasn't. There was, a lack of adjustments for sure. As you had said, there were certain things, and sometimes it would almost seem like the defense knew exactly what was coming on those screen passes. There was a play they loved to do, like wide receiver reverses to Justin Hardy or Braylon Addison. And, those guys are great players. They're great receivers. But, I'm not sure that's particularly a running play you want to call frequently. Like, why would you want to hand off your ball to a receiver when you have William Stanback and Daniel Adeboboye, who are very hard-nosed runners capable of grinding out yards? Why not just pound that ball up the middle? But, there was
both performed when called on this year, too.
Exactly.
Right?
There was multiple games where receivers had more carries than Daniel Adeboboye. Like, I don't understand how that's even possible, but that's something that the Red Blacks did this season.
I'll be honest, there was at least 1 or 2 times during this season where I was like, wait, William Stanback is in Ottawa? I forgot that happened. Because then you'd see him on a highlight and it's like, oh.
I think he only had 2 games with more than 10 carries. And he played 17 games. So it's like, why, if you have that guy, why aren't you using him? Especially because Bob Dice is a coach who has been very clear since he became the head coach in Ottawa that he wanted a tough, hard-nosed team who could run the ball, kind of impose their will. And, if you want to do that and you have the tools to do that, why aren't you doing that? And that kind of becomes the question.
It kind of feels like we're talking about Jason Moss about 10 years ago too, right?
Yeah.
And I said we still have that problem in Montreal going on too from time to time. You forget who their running back is too because they don't use them either. But it was just it seemed like it was just a case of the person trying to put together the puzzle didn't have the pieces they need, or as Bill Parcells explained it, like you don't hire an Italian chef and give him Chinese ingredients, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that works for sure.
Right. And so the defense seemed like they were always having to try to carry the load, and they had some talent, but you were asking them to do something more than they were capable of, weren't you?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely saw games where the defense played actually quite well, but then eventually kind of wore down. And then, there were other games where the defense in particular had a lot of injuries at the linebacker position. The secondary has been an issue going back to last year. In the offseason, Brian Burke completely overhauled it. I think there were 4 new starters. But yeah, at the end of the day, a lot of those issues that kind of, lingered from 2024 still were issues in 2025. Like the secondary, that the zone got shredded. They weren't good at getting pressure on the quarterback this year. In previous seasons, they did a pretty good job of, collapsing the pocket. This year, they didn't. Now, whether that's because some of the players they were counting on, to generate that pressure underperformed, whether that's because, the defensive scheme just didn't bring a lot of pressure or it was easily picked up. But yeah, the defense, I wouldn't say that it was a weakness, but it also wasn't a strength. And, when you have an underperforming offense and if your defense isn't going to be a differentiator, then, it's not going to play out well for you.
No, and they were even picking at that defense near the end of the season with the trade of Lorenzo Malden, a trade that makes sense when you consider he's 33 and at the end of his contract, but that kind of signaled the end of the season, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think at that point they weren't mathematically eliminated, but they were pretty much eliminated. So yeah, I mean, I do think that was, a tidy piece of business by Burke to get some kind of return on an investment, because as you said, at 33 years old, there's no guarantee that Malden would have been re-signed. So, if you can get a 4th-round pick, for a 33-year-old defensive player, I mean, especially if you're not going to the playoffs, why not?
Well, exactly. And even things that had been almost guarantees going into the season didn't end up being that way. Lewis Ward had one of his worst seasons too. It's been a long time since we've talked about Lewis Ward as any sort of liability, and it's really kind of weird sitting here going a 78% field goal percentage isn't good enough, but that's the way the game is these days.
Yeah, kickers have become pretty much automatic. And, in Ottawa, Lewis Ward was Mr. Automatic. Lewis Money Ward, because he just didn't miss. He had that, he holds the pro football record, right, for the longest consecutive streak at 69 kicks. And yeah, he's been nothing but lights out since he's been in Ottawa. But as you mentioned, this was the worst year of his career. He only had 1 field goal from beyond 50 yards. He missed a whole bunch of kicks. And in a number of Ottawa's losses, like those missed kicks were the difference. I can't remember.
I remember one in particular.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of them was against Winnipeg that was returned for a touchdown. And I mean, the missed kick, that was like a 10-point swing. And I think Ottawa lost by 10 points. That was a big problem. Ottawa gave up. Speaking of, it wasn't just Lewis Ward, because the special teams this year in general were bad. I think only one other team gave up more return yards than Ottawa. So, something that was a staple of Bob Dice's teams was that the special teams were very good. This year they weren't. They struggled to cover kicks. They gave up 5 kick return touchdowns, which was the most in the league. They gave up the second most yards. They only had 2 kick return touchdowns, and they were penalized a whole bunch. So, I mean, when you combine all of those things together, the offense underperforming, the defense being on the field too much, special teams being a liability, it's no surprise that Ottawa went 4-14 and missed the playoffs.
Right. Now, they did move on from Bob Dice, but they kept Burke around. How did they go forward? What is going on above what we see on the field?
It's hard to say. I mean, the fans are frustrated because, obviously Ottawa is a football town. I mean, I know that they've lost the team twice, but I will always argue that was entirely on previous ownership groups, and not because of the fans. But
can confirm as somebody that reads a lot of CFL history.
Yeah. So, I mean, the fans have always been there. But I do think one thing that should be concerning to OSEG is that this year, for the first time ever, if you go through the 9 home games that were played at Lansdowne this year at TD Place, the Red Blacks actually averaged less fans per game than at the lowest point of the Renegade era. And, everyone points to the Renegade era of truly being like the dark time of CFL football in Ottawa. But the Renegades still averaged 18,000 a game, despite everything that was going on with the Gleibermans and, obviously the poor on-field product and whatnot. And this year, the Red Blacks averaged less than 18,000 fans a game. So, that should be a huge red flag because, fans are kind of checking out. I can say, as someone who has a pair of season tickets, even though I don't live in town, I frequently give them away. This year, there were some games I literally couldn't give tickets away. Like, people just didn't want them. Which is crazy because, typically there's always somebody who wants to go. There used to be times when it was like I'd have multiple people ask me for the tickets. And this year I literally couldn't give tickets away to certain games because just nobody wanted them. They're like, oh, why am I going to go? They're going to lose. It's not going to be entertaining. So yeah, I think that, Burke is still around, and I think he needs to nail the coaching hire. I don't know what the answer is, because it's not really, as of right now anyways, an off season where there's a bunch of big names out there that, everyone's kind of buzzing about. So, but it's going to have to be a good hire. It's going to have to be someone who's, committed to coming in and turn around. And the other thing that kind of could be a little bit of an interesting situation is the fact that although Burke, was retained, he's on a 1-year deal. And typically, if you're a head coach, you want to be somewhere where you're going to have some stability. So you're probably seeking a contract of a couple of years, at least 2 or 3. But are you going to feel comfortable signing somewhere where the GM only has 1 year left on his deal? Because if that GM goes, whoever comes in next isn't the guy that hired you. So, what does that do for your job security? So it remains to be seen if OSEG is going to extend Dice, or if they're going to extend Burke, or just keep him on this 1 year, let him play out his 1 year deal. And if that has an impact on the coaching search, because it might. And then, from there, they're going to have to really kind of go through the roster and see, who's part of the solution going forward and who they can thank for their time and move on from.
Yeah, you almost think they extend Burke by 1 year and just say, here's your 2 years. get something done, and
Mm-hmm.
make that clear to whoever's coming in to coach too. Because at least at that point, then you have somebody that you're not having to take a retread that's taking one last chance, or somebody that might not be quite as qualified but is willing to do anything to be a head coach.
Yeah.
So you really have to try to stabilize that front office situation before you can get the quality hire you deserve. Uh, at the same time, you've got Rick Campbell sitting in the bullpen. He's been there before, had issues with previous front offices, but is there in case of fire. Basically, I'm thinking, right?
Mhm.
But do you even want to go down that road, considering the special teams weren't even that hot this year?
Yeah, I mean that's a tough question. I'm glad I'm not making that call because, of course, I'm sure hiring Rick Campbell, there would be a certain percentage of the fan base that would be thrilled. He's someone who got Ottawa 2, 3 Grey Cups. Ottawa did have some success with him, but obviously, he flamed out in British Columbia, and then this year he was not very good coaching Ottawa special teams. And now, on one hand, you could kind of look at that and be like, okay, well, he was put in a position to coach a unit that he has not coached since 2012. But on the other hand, he accepted the job. So he accepted the job, he did the job, and he didn't do it well. So, maybe is he someone that is better as a head coach and not as a special teams coach? I think, that's a fair comment potentially. But I also don't know. I think fans in Ottawa want real change. And I don't know that hiring Rick Campbell would be real change. I'm not saying
No.
that he wouldn't do a good job. I'm not saying he wouldn't be able to turn things around. But I do think that there's a certain percentage of the fan base that wants something fresh, that wants something new. And obviously, Rick Campbell wouldn't be that. He would be kind of, circling back to the past and hoping for the best. And, maybe that would be a successful thing, or maybe not. So, yeah, I really don't know. I'm glad I'm not making that decision.
Yeah, and the Best Buy window on that was probably during the season. If you're going to make a change, you at least had somebody you could promote into the role and have some continuity. But now you might need to make so many changes that you don't want that continuity anyway.
Yeah, potentially, right? And then, for fans in Ottawa, they might kind of say, okay, continuity of what? Continuity of losing
Of
seasons,
winning
aside
4 games, what
yeah.
was it? 3 of the last 4 seasons that they won 4?
Yes, I believe so. I think it was 2022 they were 4-14, 2023 they were 4-14, and then obviously this year. So yeah, last year was the lone exception.
Right. Yeah, that's tough to want to continue to go down that path. Anything else that Osei can do? Because I've been once, and
Mhm.
it happened to be a pretty terrible game to watch, but it was a good experience to go and see. It's a great place to go and see a game. Anything else they can do beyond the football product to help draw people in?
Well, I think one thing that they started doing towards the end of this season was they introduced tailgating at Lansdowne. Because in the past, there's always been like diehard groups of fans, like the Southsiders, who have typically met at Brewer Park, which is a couple kilometers away from Lansdowne. There's a place to park, and there's a park, and bylaw tends to leave people alone because they clean up after themselves and stuff like that. And so, in the past, if you wanted to tailgate before a Red Blacks game, you would go to Brewer, do your tailgate there, clean up your stuff, and then walk to the stadium. But this year, for a couple of games, OSEG introduced tailgating on the Great Lawn, which is kind of the lawn over there on the east end zone. And so over there, people could, drop their coolers off the night before. There was a place to store them. There was a place to store it during the game and stuff like that. So as I said, they only did it twice, but I do think that that's something that's quite interesting, because then you're, again, turning it into more of an event. And as you said, like the stadium itself is beautiful. It's in a great location. It's very easy to get to. You can park on nearby streets. You can walk. There's buses. There's so many ways to get there, and it's easy. And it is just a beautiful venue. So yeah, I think, kind of improving the game day experience helps. I think they've done a good job with that. I know they've tried to do different concerts and things like that. I know they have different kind of beer deals before kickoff and things like that. I know there's a wide variety of food vendors there. So yeah, I mean, like it's always a good time out. Typically, when people go, they always have a good time. Obviously, if you ignore the results, people have a fun outing, even if the football's not always the best. But yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, you'd want to combine a winning product because I think ultimately that's what's going to pull people back in. When Ottawa is successful, when people have a reason to believe that, the change is significant and it's something that's going to be permanent. Obviously, no one's saying that every year you have to go undefeated at home or whatnot. But I think it's not unrealistic or unfair to expect that every time you take the field at home, you're going to be fielding a competitive team and an entertaining team. So I think that the sooner they can do that, that's going to go a long way towards solving some of their attendance issues. Because I believe this year there was a 4% decrease over last season. So yeah, you had hoped to have grown that coming off a playoff appearance and whatnot, but that was not the case. So yeah, I think making that tailgating something that you could do before every home game and kind of really leaning into that, I think you could definitely develop a good tailgate culture. Because have you ever been to a game in Montreal?
I have multiple times, yes.
Montreal has a wicked tailgate setup. And I think if Ottawa could, steal that idea, steal that setup, do something similar, and kind of get people coming down for that event, get people coming to tailgate there, I think that would go a long way just to, providing something extra that could be kind of unique and interesting and cool, and that, it could really kind of take off.
Yeah, no, if they can mimic what Montreal's doing with the tailgating, that would be a huge step, along with putting a competitive product on the field. Any suggestions on your end as far as like what kind of thing they need to do in the off season? They seem to have talent. Do they need to make a big splash in the coaching? Do they need to make a big splash quarterback wise? What would help energize that fan base? Or is it just a fan base that's going to sit back and say, show me before I get excited?
I think there's a lot of people right now that are in show me mode. I think people just kind of want to sit back and wait. I know a number of people who have season tickets who have, ignoring the rule change thing, because that is a real thing, even though a lot of people are downplaying it. I do believe there's a number of people who are very pissed off about the potential rule changes.
Oh, I'm not downplaying it at all. Trust me.
Oh yeah. But I think that's a real thing. But I mean, ignoring that, there's other season ticket holders that are like, I'm not renewing until I see who they hire. I'm not renewing until I see who is re-signed, who is kind of let go. So I do think that at least in Ottawa this year, there's going to be a number of fans who are kind of sit back and they kind of want to see how the team is going to react and what they're going to do. Of course, I think, there's anytime you make a splash, it's good. So I think people would be interested in that. But I think you could probably sell the fan base on someone who might be a little bit of an unknown, whether it's, an assistant coordinator from somewhere else, an offensive coordinator from another city, even if it's a promising youth sports coach. I just think if it's someone who, kind of oozes competence, I think fans can get behind that. So I think that's really more than anything what you want to do. As you said, they already have some very talented pieces. Khalil Pimpleton is signed through next season, so that's good. They're going to have a number of decisions. For example, someone like Eugene Lewis, great player. Is he going to want to stay in Ottawa after this season? Because although he put up 1,000 yards, I would argue he was very underutilized. So potentially, is he going to want to stay in Ottawa again? Because if you can keep him in the fold, I think that's a good thing. You have someone like Justin Hardy, who's been very consistent, who's put up 3 1,000-yard seasons in a row. Obviously, he's going to be a little bit older, but again, I think he's someone you'd want to keep in town if you can. Darius Pickett, he was hurt last year, tore his Achilles. There was a lot of doubt if he'd even be ready for the start of this season. But not only did he come back and play all 18 games, he led the Red Blacks in tackles. He was probably, the biggest spark plug they had on defense, constantly around the ball, bringing the energy all the time. So he's someone you would definitely want to keep around. But again, he's also someone that I believe is very demanding of his teammates. And I think that he wants to be on a winning team. So, again, I think that Burke's going to have his work cut out for him to kind of convince him that, he can do that in Ottawa. I think, re-signing someone like that. And then, Ottawa needs to add pieces. They need to add players, especially on the defensive side of the ball. More playmakers, more guys who are capable of, generating turnovers. The secondary, as I said, was porous. So you definitely need to kind of maybe, whether that's finding someone in the States who is, maybe NFL experience, maybe something like that, maybe a rookie, but who has good college production. Maybe you try to poach someone who's going to be a free agent from another CFL team who's a more experienced veteran. But I think, getting some ball hawks would be good. And then the defensive line, obviously they have some good promising Canadians in Aiden John. They have others, Daniel Okapoko. I know he was hurt this year. Bryce Carter is someone who has been very good, along with Michael Wakefield. But again, because they are older veterans, are you going to be re-signing them again? Are you going to be looking to turn that position over? Because if you are, you still need to replace it. As you said, Lorenzo Malden's gone. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely spots that are going to be open, and it's going to be interesting to see how they choose to fill them.
Now, do you think they need to make a change in the quarterback room, or do you think they have the guys they want as long as they can stay healthy?
That's a very interesting question. I do think Drew Brown is an extremely talented quarterback. But yeah, you can't ignore the fact that this year he had a number of injuries. And yeah, I mean, if he's not on the field, that's obviously not helping the team win. When he was on the field, he, put up good numbers. Sometimes though, some of those numbers didn't come until the games were kind of out of reach. So, I'll say they're kind of like empty calories, some of those yards. Because of course, if a defense is just playing off, letting you complete those short, easy passes. I mean, it's very easy to rack up the yards. I'm not saying that's what he did all the time, but I do believe there were games where his final stat line was very impressive, but it didn't really feel like the offense was very effective. That said, I do think he can be a starting quarterback in the league. He has proven that he can be. I do think he is a good quarterback. I think he's in the upper echelon. But yeah, I mean, I do think there would be some hesitation of going into the season with him as your undisputed number one, simply because of the health issues. Dustin Crum is someone who, as I said earlier, has really kind of developed and grown a lot this year. I thought he actually had an excellent 2025.
Yeah.
Coming into the year, there was a lot of questions about his passing, whether it's his accuracy, arm strength, and stuff like that. And he's still very young, but he has quite a bit of playing experience. And this year, he really did seem to kind of take another step in his development. He protected the ball. Obviously, he's tough as hell. As you can see, when he takes off with the ball, he's not afraid of contact. He doesn't really get hurt and miss time, which is very useful. But I think that if Crum is someone they decide they would like to have as their starter, I think you need an offensive coordinator who's going to commit to developing a system that plays to his strengths. And also, too, Crum showed that he has a wicked arm. So, again, with the system Ottawa ran this year, they didn't really push the ball down the field. But it'd be interesting to see what Crum would look like in a system that gave him a lot of mobility, rollouts, play actions, run pass options, things where you could kind of take advantage of his legs. And then you also have receivers stretching the field for, those deep shots. I think that could be very interesting. And then Tyree Adams, we kind of saw a little bit at the end of the season. Also someone who kind of an interesting player. He's been in the league for 4 years, but he only has 3 career starts. Seems like he has a good arm, but obviously in his limited action, he did throw a number of interceptions, which is kind of to be expected given how little he's played. So yeah, I don't know. I think that if they were to run it back and come back with Brown, Crum, and Adams, I think the fans would be okay with that. But yeah, I do wonder if you would kind of anoint someone the starter or kind of let it play out. I mean, obviously Brown is being paid as the starter. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they do.
Yeah. One name I can't get out of my head for Ottawa for some reason is Jarius Jackson, quarterback coach right now in Winnipeg, but has a little bit of at least interim head coaching experience in Edmonton and has coached teams that have the quarterback type of a Dustin Crum and the receivers that are good for going downfield as well. I almost wonder if his offensive package might not be a better fit for what they have going on. Although bringing in Jarius Jackson also opens up the question: do they want to kick the tires on like a Trey Ford or something?
Well, I mean, that's the other option, right? Because perhaps you'd want, 2 quarterbacks of the similar mold. I would say Drew Brown is much more of a pocket passer, whereas Dustin Crum is more of that mobile quarterback. So, what would a quarterback room look like of Trey Ford and Dustin Crum? You could develop a system that, either one of them you could insert in. And if one was hurt and the other had to play, you wouldn't really have to change much because they are the same type of athlete. So yeah, I mean, especially since it seems like Edmonton is probably going to release him, I would assume they might trade him. But I mean, if I was another CFL team, I wouldn't trade with Edmonton. I'd make them release him because it seems like that's where they're headed anyways. So yeah, I mean, and then if you were to throw Ford in the mix, then what do you do with Brown? Do you try to trade him? Does then Ottawa turn around and release him? I don't know. But yeah, something like that could be interesting. I think one thing that you would want, hopefully, though, is whoever you did kind of hire as your coach or your offensive coordinator, I think you would really hope that they would just kind of tailor their system to maximize the skill set of the players they had at their disposal. Because I think that's what was so frustrating this year about watching the Red Blacks is a lot of the times you were watching the offense and it wasn't like, oh my God, this team sucks. They have no playmakers. It was like, oh no, Ottawa
They have a
has
ton of
very good
playmakers. You're
playmakers,
just
but
not
like,
getting them in space.
yeah, like why aren't they using them? Why is Eugene Lewis finishing a game with 2 targets? Why is Justin Hardy having his first catch in the fourth quarter? Why does William Stanback have 4 carries? So I think it's things like that that are so maddening. So I just hope that whoever comes in, was really putting their players, would tailor their system. I mean, obviously, of course, every coach is going to have their own philosophies and their own system that they kind of like to run their base. But then from that, I'd hope they would kind of really focus on tailoring it to the strengths of those players.
All right. Well, I'm gonna let you get out of here. We've done a good job of covering where Ottawa has been and where they're gonna be looking to go forward. Santino, how can people find you?
Yeah, you can find my stuff at 3 Down Nation. I cover Ottawa all year long, off season, preseason, regular season, playoffs when we're there. I cover Ottawa all the time. You can just go to 3 Down Nation and find my stuff there.
All right. Well, this is a short mini-sode of the Rouge, White, and Blue podcast, and we'll see you when we see you.